In this video, Misoponyo, a 3D generalist at Roblox, takes you step by step on how to finalize and optimize your custom characters in order to import them into Studio. To set the stage for the demo, she'll start by giving context on the history of avatar and character creation, along with an overview of the process and the technical requirements involved. This one's a bit long, so feel free to use the timestamps to jump around to the following topics. For more information, be sure to check out the resources in the description.
Hello everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join in on this presentation about making an avatar. My Roblox handle is Misoponyo, and I've been at Roblox for 3 years, and I'm a 3D generalist on the Alpha Strike team. This presentation, I'll be going over the process and the creative and technical decisions that currently go into making a character and clothing on our platform, as well as clear up some confusion and misconceptions. In this video, we're going to be covering the following. First, we'll be covering what is an avatar. Second is a creation overview. You'll learn how is an avatar typically created, including how long the process takes, the general steps, and the types of software and workflows required. Third, we'll also be covering the various technical requirements for a Roblox avatar. Fourth is a practical walkthrough where I show you the general process through our DCC tools all the way through to importing into Studio. And then optional, we have a lot of great documentation and downloadable resources, which is linked in the video description. So in order to comprehend where we are now, it's essential to grasp the history that has brought us here. Where the term avatar originates. Avatar comes from the Sanskrit word avatara, which literally means descent. The early uses of the term was first used in a computer game by the Plato role-playing game Avatar in 1979. In Norman Spinrad's novel Songs from the Stars in 1980, the term avatar is used in a description of a computer-generated virtual experience. The term avatar for the on-screen user representation debuted in a computer game Ultima 4, Quest of the Avatar in 1985. Richard Garriott, the game designer, aimed for players to embody their real selves in the virtual world and emphasize player responsibility due to ethical considerations in the story. Fast forward from the origin of Avatar, these past few decades we've been utilizing 2D and 3D avatars to explore different digital personas of ourselves through the internet, on social media, web forums, and video games. So an avatar is a character. Well, not quite. A character is a representation of a person in a narrative or dramatic work of art. An avatar is a computer or game user's representation of themselves or alter ego. A character is a representation of a person, whereas an avatar is a representation of the player or artist. A 3D character artist for games is someone that has a strong foundation in anatomy and figure sculpting, and whose primary job is creating characters and creatures from a concept to a fully realized game-ready character. As a 3D generalist, I'm the closest thing to a character artist at Roblox. A 3D generalist means we're pretty general in what we can do. We tend to be a jack of all trades, master of none type of artist. We're capable of creating characters, props, and environments and managing various facets of the 3D production process. How long does a character take to create? A highly detailed, realistic character can take up to 2 or more months to create, even for an experienced character artist in the game industry. It could take 10 hours if you're making the Roblox noob, or it could take 400 hours, depending on how much detail, functionality, and iterations you put into your character. Making a character for Marketplace. This part of the presentation, I'll be covering creating an R15 avatar with layered clothing and rigid accessories and digital content creation to Studio, with the workflow that is currently available to our developers. Software used in workflow definitions. ZBrush is where you create your high-resolution mesh by sculpting a subdivided mesh. Maya, modeling. Create a low-resolution mesh or mesh by Retopology that's game-ready from your high-resolution mesh. UV mapping, the flat surface representation of a 3D model used to wrap textures. Rigging, creating a skeleton for a 3D model so it can move. Skinning, binding the actual 3D mesh to the joint setup you created. Caging, a cage is a wrap deformer that defines the inner and outer surfaces of your asset, and it corresponds to an avatar in layered clothing. Facts, animated isolated facial movements that when used together can create any facial expression. Substance Painter. Baking. Transferring the data from your high resolution to your low resolution mesh. Texturing. Plug in your baked out mesh maps in Substance Painter to create your final textures. Studio. Integrating a game-ready character to run in real time. Component requirements. Traditionally, an artist only has to worry about the final look of a character, including all the clothes and accessories the character is expected to have. In Roblox, especially when creating an avatar character for the marketplace, a character artist has to create every component that makes up a character. Example, the whole body, each piece of clothing, and accessories. Mesh requirements. R15 avatars need to be broken up into 15 body part meshes and capped at open ends instead of being a single mesh. The reason Marketplace requires this is so body parts can be swapped out with another character's body part. Issues that can happen. Vertex normal seams or texture seams can occur at part connections, edges or vertices not lining up correctly between each part. Normals on a body with parts aren't consistent with a body that's one contiguous mesh. Mesh budget requirements. The mesh budget for Marketplace assets has a strict budget of just over 10K triangles for avatars, and 4K triangle budget for each layered clothing and accessory. The 10K budget for avatars isn't calculated as a whole and is split up into separate budgets for the head, arms, torso, and legs. For example, though this character as a whole is under 10K triangles, their arms are over budget for the arms budget. Texture budget requirements. Characters and layered clothing are capped at a 1024 by 1024 texture size and also requires the artist to break up each component into a separate texture set, which our avatar system requires. Color tinting in single material. Color tinting is the process of adding transparency to your textures, making the base color of your mesh visible. This is most commonly used for skin tones. The way to achieve color tinting in Studio is by creating a transparent PNG where you're limited to one area that can be tinted. The artist has to create a transparent area where they want the color to come through and take a palette, as well as overlaying enough color, shaded, and highlighted details so the character doesn't appear dead or flat, but not enough where it affects the color you're picking so it accurately reflects the color. This can be difficult to balance and get right. Cage requirements. Characters and layered clothing requires a corresponding cage with every creation. Caging a character, where you encompass your character with a multi-part cage that just covers the surface. Each cage mesh corresponds to each body part. Cage mesh topology should be as evenly distributed as possible. Mistakes that can occur are cage parts not matching up with body parts, editing the UVs accidentally on the cage or altering the vertex count, cage not completely covering the body and is intersecting. This will cause hidden surface removal to calculate incorrectly. Cage is too inflated and will make the clothes look puffy. Caging layered clothing, where you create clothing to an inner cage. Define the outer limits for the outer cage by encompassing the clothing to just cover the surface. Outer cage mesh topology should match the inner cage mesh distribution to mitigate distortion. Mistakes that can occur are the inner and outer cage have intersections. This could cause hidden surface removal to calculate incorrectly. Clothing fitting too far away from the inner cage will cause it to look too puffy. Editing the UVs accidentally on the cage or altering the vertex count. Quick reminder, there are links to our documentation and resources in the video description where we supply a multi and single mesh cage file for our creators. Rigging and skinning requirements. Roblox expects only 15 joints on their body if they want to create an R15 avatar. Rigging. We provide a 15-joint rig for our devs to move into position on their own character. The dynamic head rig we require them to create on their own since the amount of joints needed can differ. Joints and attachments can have a translation value, but with scale and rotation frozen. Attachments have to be in correct locations. Left and right grip attachments are the only ones that should have a X positive rotation value of 90 for holding swords and guns. Skinning. Skinning is something our devs have to define on their own. One bind pose only with a 4-joint maximum influence. No weighting to the root or humanoid root node. Skinning is tougher to balance the weighting between separate body part meshes. Naming requirements for Roblox. The naming schema is very strict, and Studio's importer will not recognize a character as an R15 avatar unless it follows it. Meshes, cages, backs, joints, and attachment points require exact naming. Even when you correct the name in the importer, it doesn't fix the issue, and you have to fix it in DCC. If the cage or attachment name is wrong, the indication that it's wrong is because the cage or attachment is rendered. Naming schema is slightly different between layered clothing and R15 avatars. For avatars, it requires body part name and postfix_geo, but for layered clothing, the postfix_geo isn't needed and the prefix needs to match the cage's name. Dynamic head FACS, facial acting coding system. FACS is a comprehensive anatomically based system for describing all visually discernible facial movement. Animated isolated facial movements that when used together can create any facial expression. Each frame has a keyed face shape in DCC, and we require a minimum of 17 to be made, which can go up to the 100s if also creating corrective combined shapes. A creator has to add attributes to the head of each frame and the corresponding face pose made. Studio and Marketplace. Our avatar system is very powerful and makes it easy to use right out of the box and work with everything. For example, all animations, emotes, layered clothing, and rigid accessories all work automatically with creating a character using this schema. The downfall is that it doesn't allow for much deviation if you want to use some aspects of the tech for an inexperienced character only. For example, a dev wants to make a single mesh body with a higher fidelity rig, but they also want to use the caging tech for clothes and the default animations. Right now, this wouldn't be supported. In conclusion, creating avatars and characters for Roblox is a unique process that involves a deep understanding of both artistic and technical elements and can be a bit challenging. However, with the right tools, knowledge, and attention to detail, they can bring vibrant and engaging characters to life, enriching the Roblox experience for millions of players worldwide. Keep in mind that we're working on a lot of exciting technology to make this easier and approachable, even for non-artists, to begin putting their imagination to life. This part of the presentation is where I'll touch on some of the things I've covered so far in a live demo. I'll briefly go over the DCC workflows before integrating the avatar into Studio and touching on some of the tools needed to complete your avatar.
So first off, we want to start with our high resolution mesh. And I created this in ZBrush, and there's other 3D applications you can definitely use in place of this, but just wanted to show like the breakdown, which I kind of covered in my presentation, where you actually have to create every level and component. So starting off with like the base body, it has to be sort of fully realized and look complete without clothing on, and with a modesty layer included. And then on top of that, you gotta model each component of the clothing. So the top, the bottom, the shoes, anything else you want to include. And they have to look complete and work well on its own, not as a whole. So that also creates a little bit more work when planning on creating your character. And then we also have the third level, which I parsed out as the rigid accessories. And so that uses a little bit of a different tech where you're not using rigging and skinning. So that has to be like connected in a different way in Studio, but just separate out each of these pieces. So together it'll make a fully realized avatar. This character here is 103.05 million points, which is verts. And yeah, you can't just, export this out and import it into Studio, expect it to run in real time. So what we would do from here is decimate the mesh to a more reasonable amount of verts. and then retopo. All right, so once you've decimated your mesh in ZBrush, you can export it out and import it into a 3D application of your choice. You would do this for all your different parts for your avatar. In this case, I just chose to do a hair because just to simplify things, so we didn't, overcomplicate the scene here with retopoing. So what I usually will do is just like retopo each individual asset, so or bring it in separately, just so I don't like bog down Maya with too many verts. Because right now, even decimated, this is at 500,000 verts, which is still pretty high. I sometimes will do 2 versions where I'll even decimate it further for just like a retopo version, and then keep a higher version for baking my high resolution to my low resolution mesh. So yeah, right now it's still too high to run in real time. So we're gonna create a low resolution mesh. So first off, every 3D application will do this slightly differently, but you will have tools to be able to do some retopology. So we're gonna create a live surface. And now you can see it's now in a live state. And then you want to navigate to this modeling toolkit tab and click on the quad draw. From here, I always kind of have to review my shortcuts because I don't get to retopo too often. So I tend to forget which hotkeys to use. So that's a great little cheat sheet. But here I would also want to consider the surface offset. I think 0.02 is like a good start, but we can always adjust that later. So essentially, to start retopoing, you can draw your verts, your dots, and I got 4 here, and then you hold down Shift to actually draw that surface. So I'm gonna continue to do that, and you can see that it will definitely take a while to complete this whole hair by retopoing. But yeah, we'll continue to draw out sometimes it lags. Yeah, that's why I recommend to sometimes decimate your high resolution mesh even further, just so your 3D application doesn't lag when you're trying to create your low res mesh. All right, and I don't want to bore you too much with retopoing this whole mesh, but this is some of the process tools. So right now I'm holding down Tab plus middle mouse button to drag and extrude. That's a good way to like extend your mesh when you're retopoing, and then as well as like taking individual extrusions to cover the surface and make sure you're capturing the silhouette of your high resolution mesh. All right, but yeah, you can see how I would go in here and maybe like move my dots a little bit better. It's definitely a little thin there, so it's moving off the surface. You can left mouse click to move your verts into place. But yeah, that's the start of retopoing, and you would want to do it until you covered the whole surface of your mesh. Let me get out of quad draw, and you can see like that's my new resolution mesh I've started. I'm going to hide that and actually show you what the actual retopo version looks like. You can see here, if I get out of live and then click on my low resolution mesh, it is just over 1,000 verts and then just over 2,000 tries. So that's a much more reasonable vert count, triangle count to have for a game ready asset versus, a ZBrush that has millions of points. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that low resolution mesh. And then from here, I would want to do my UVing. In Maya, we have a UV editor tab, and I would open that up, which I actually have UV distortion checked on. I like to check that on just to check to make sure my UVs aren't getting too distorted. So making sure it's not too blue or red where it's getting distorted, but like in the white range. It's okay if it leans towards either a little bit, just not as too much. So for UV editing, usually this will come in like when you first open up your UV editor, it will be a complete like mess or just like one single mesh. So what I would do is actually determine where these seams should be, and I would use my UV tools to do that. Every UV tool in 3D applications are different, so just marking out where my seams would be. So I would want to hide it where you can't see. So underneath the hair would be a good place to place a seam. In the hairband, I would want to place a seam. And then anywhere it's like where you want to avoid too much distortion in your UVs is somewhere you can't really help. So sometimes having not so well placed seams, so you just kind of have to do. So like, yeah, underneath here. And then from there, you would unwrap it and then lay it in the 0 to 1 space. And then I'll toggle that UV distortion on. So yeah, looks pretty good. You get a little bit of distortion in certain areas, but for the most part, it's better to keep larger pieces where you don't have too many seams. So you don't get any like baking errors or noticeable texture seams. So from there, once I'm done, got my low res mesh, my UVs, I would want to export my low resolution mesh. So export selection, go into wherever I want to put this. I'm just going to put it as a temp file because I already have this exported out. All right, and then we would go on to the baking process of baking a high resolution mesh to a low resolution mesh. All right, I now have Substance Painter open, and this is where I'm going to begin showing you the process of baking from high resolution mesh to a low resolution mesh, taking what we just did in Maya. You can also do this in other applications, even Maya, 3ds Max, Blender. I actually prefer to bake textures in Marmoset, but just the ease of switching between applications, I'm just going to do it in Substance Painter. So first off, go to File, New, and you're going to choose your template here. Roblox actually has a template you can use, which basically makes it easy for you to just output the compatible textures for Studio. So I'm going to choose that. Normal map format is OpenGL, and I'm going to start with like a 2048 because I'm going to I'll be outputting a 1024 texture at the largest, but I always like to work a size larger than a 10K. Right, so we're going to select my low res mesh that I want to start texturing. I haven't baked any maps in an outside application, so everything else looks good. So I'm going to hit OK. Right, and here's just my mesh, and I'm going to go to either here the croissant, or you can go to texture set settings and then scroll down and bake mesh maps here. So you got 2 options. I'm going to click on here. So we got our low resolution mesh here, and I'm going to import my high resolution mesh, which sometimes I have a hard time finding. Where is it? High definition meshes. Here you go. There we go. And let's select my high res. All right. So you can see here my high resolution mesh has loaded, and it's already kind of offset the cage accordingly to make sure it covers the whole surface and includes it for transferring the high resolution mesh to the low resolution mesh, even though there's some intersections happening. All right. Basically, you want to make sure there's like no red, which there's a little bit of red. So I'm probably going to offset it a little bit more. Right. Cage surface opacity, max frontal distance. I'm going to offset this a little bit. That way we get rid of any of the red. All right. Look pretty good. All right. And now I'm going to make sure I have all the textures. I want to bake out normal world. ID isn't really necessary because I haven't really assigned different materials to it. Check that off. All right, that looks good. And I'm gonna output this. Actually, it makes sense for me to do it at 1024. I was thinking of a character where I would output it at 1024 as the final. So 2048 is a little bit large of a canvas for this hair. I would actually export this out as a 512. So this baking the mesh maps out of 1024 makes sense. All right, and then I'm gonna hit bake selected textures. You can see just going through and baking all the mesh maps I will use to actually create my final textures. And then once that's done, I'm gonna return the painting mode. And then actually want to change my canvas size to 1024 just to make sure, I don't have any issues with it lagging. No point in working at a larger canvas size if I'm actually not utilizing it. All right, so yeah, you can see there's some baking errors. Definitely could be a little bit better. Let me see what kind of went wrong. Looks like not including maybe the rear distance as much as it should. Might try and bake that out again. Seems like maybe that's helping. Yep, that looks a little bit better. So you might need to make some adjustments to make sure there's no baking errors. So yeah, that looks a lot better. All right, so there we have it. We have all our mesh maps, which you can actually go to this drop down and look at all your mesh maps and like view them to make sure there's no sort of baking errors. I like to kind of scroll through them just to make sure it's so no ID map, ambient occlusion, looks good, curvature, and position, thickness. Basically, everything we'll need to create a procedural texture, final texture. All right. Yeah, this looks pretty good. Got some baking errors, but I'm gonna ignore that and say it's good enough. All right. So fast forward, and we got now our final textures done on this hair, and it's looking pretty good. If you actually go through each single channel texture, it gives you a good breakdown of each one and how it looks. So here's your base color, and I personally like to actually bake in enough lighting, just so if your lighting gets dropped, the quality of that, or surface appearance with PBR textures, like if you lose your metalness, roughness, and your normal map, that overall, like as a base color texture, it will still read. This is good for like the lower end devices, so just something to keep in mind. And then from here, nothing is metallic, so black is correct in this case. Roughness, I like to bake in a good amount of like lighting and detail just to help vary the surface detail. That's a preference I have. And then we got the normal plus height mesh. So a good amount of painted in like surface detail, which really helps the overall asset to read. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with the results of this. But yeah, just to break down too, like everything else for this character that's been textured, this is sort of the final result in Substance Painter. And each UV and texture is separated out to be its own component for each asset. So the bow, the shirt, and everything has its own UV sheet. And then just to go over quickly, I'm going to click on the actual body. Substance Painter gets a little slow when you have a lot of different layers. All right, so looking at the actual skin texture, I'll show you what it looked like originally. So it definitely looked a lot better and had a lot more painted in detail in the original opaque version, but I created a version that was tintable. So if I turn off opaque, you can see that like you're seeing it as a gray texture. Which is just filling in the background with that. But if you actually go to like base color, you can see this is actually a transparent texture that I created with overlaying detail. So the character skin doesn't look too flat or dead with not including enough detail in color, so the skin looks alive. So yeah, if I go back to material and then swap out some of these other colors, you can see that the underlying color fills it in with the palette that I want. So this is a good way to test before bringing into studio how your overlaying color will look with different colors underneath it. So it's good to go through here and just sort of like test out a lot of different colors to make sure whatever you're overlaying in terms of color and baked in lighting isn't affecting the overall color underneath too drastically. That's one of the things that's very hard to get right, because if you tune it specifically for a certain color, it could be difficult for it to look good on another color. So just keep that in mind if you want to create a tintable texture. So I'm going to check all these off. So first and foremost, exporting out a transparent PNG has a little bit of a different process. I'm going to go here to File and then go to Export Textures. And I'll usually do this separately just because it's a different process. There might be another way to actually do this, but I do it with using document channels with alpha. And then essentially I'm just wanting the base color texture. And then 8 bits or 8 bits and dithering, which it's a little bit better to choose 8 bits and dithering for transparent PNG, just to smooth it out just in general. So this looks good. And then I'm going to hit export. And I have all these other ones checked off because I only want to export out my transparent PNG. So here we go. And then you can see here that the transparent PNG is has like a black background. So that's kind of why it looks sort of brown. But if you were to bring it in like Photoshop, you can see that this is actually like transparent. So once I have that, then I go back here and then I actually Control-Shift-E to export my textures and then check my global settings. And I want to switch this to either your Roblox export settings, or I have actually my own that I created, but either one will work fine. And then I usually have this based on the texture set sizes. So everything that's sort of dictated here, it will export it out at those sizes, just making it a little bit easier. All right. And then also you could override it with your own settings, but in this case for the Nature Archer Girl, I don't want to export out a base color since I already did that. But for everything else, it has an opaque texture. So I'm going to export it out and then got all of your textures. Makes it very easy just to export it all at once and get the correct size and the naming. That's what I actually did. With my own export, I actually set it up with the naming I want. And then I also dictate that in my texture set list. So that's why I kind of use my own preset template. All right, that about covers it for texturing in Substance Painter. Just a quick overview. All right, so now that our textures are all done, I'm going to be taking you back into Maya and going over the process of setting up your character before exporting it out and importing it into Studio. So just to kind of go over what usually kind of would be done, or at least when you first retopo your character, you're going to be retopoing a single mesh where it's not broken up into the 15 components and capped at each end. So this is kind of what it would look like. And then so if I hide that and go into my 15 part version, you can see here each body part, like the arm is broken up into 3 components: torso, lower torso, right and left leg. And if you hide one of them, you can see that it is got these rounded sort of caps, and on each side it is capped and watertight. So this is a little bit more work, but it's kind of essential since we need it to work with our avatar system, and you can be able to swap out different body parts and not see into the inside of the mesh. So that's why we cap it. So corresponding with these 15 body parts, we also need the cage to correspond. So yeah, expects exact naming, and the naming corresponds with the cage as well. So if you see here, and I'll go in X-ray mode, it should line up exactly to each body part. So you can have a little bit of wiggle room. It's not like completely exact. So I think the reason why I decided to actually extend it a little bit past is for better clothing fit. But it needs to be pretty close to where it lines up in order for the hidden surface removal to work in Studio, which that whole system is, it will hide the underlying surface when you actually wear clothing on top of your body. And it uses this sort of cage to calculate that. So if we go back, so if you look at the overall cage, you will see too that it's a really close fit to cover the surface of the body of the avatar. This ensures that clothing fits as best as possible, and then also that it covers the underlying surface really well. So just enough to cover it, but not enough where it's too puffy. So let me hide that. Actually, go over this. I make a separate version of all the cage parts, but when we have it set up in the files we give you a cage for the character where it's set up with all the body part cages, and then it's driven by a deformer. So this is the deformer, and it's a single mesh. And the reason why we do that is just it makes it easier to edit these 15 objects that are separate. And so if we move along the seams, you can see here, I'll hide it, and you can see the cage part, the separate cage parts are also moved with it. So that way it's like you're not editing and you're creating holes in your cage mesh accidentally. I know we don't have that set up in Blender, but I think it's because we don't. Blender doesn't really support this, having a wrap deformer drive the individual parts. So that's why I usually make a version. There's a version of this, and then I basically delete history, and then I make a separate version of it when I go to export, just to keep it separate. So covering that, and then if we go over our cage, not our cage, our rig, you can see here I positioned it to correspond with my mesh. And then we got the face rig as well to correspond with that. We provide a base R15 rig, but we do not give you sort of a base face rig, just because it can always vary depending on the type of character you're creating. But some of the templates, I mean, they have that, since you can edit the mesh and whatnot to a certain extent, and it preserve all the face shapes that's created. So you can always just grab it from there and have something to at least work with. Remove joints, add joints, however you like to at least give you a good start. So that's our rig, and you can see here everything is sort of weighted accordingly. Selecting the mesh. There you go. A nice fall off. You can see there the weighting between the part connections. There's no gapping that's happening, and that can be a little tough. You gotta weight it exactly the same amount between the two different verts. And then I'm gonna hide the joints so you can see this, but if you go through, you can see all the fax controllers that's been added to the face, the fax shapes that's been added to the face. And if I click on my head, you have to do this as well in Blender, but if you go to head geo, extra attributes, this is where you add the actual face shape names to each frame that corresponds to each face shape. And this is what Studio uses in order to understand what face shape you're creating. And then you have your combined face shapes, sort of corrective shapes when certain shapes that are used together, they're causing issues. It's just a good way to have cleaner results. So now that I am done that, I'm gonna hide that. Oh, here's my accessories. So each accessory has, for layered clothing, has an inner and outer cage, and you see they're kind of named accordingly to each thing. So if I go to hide all of this and then hide everything else, only what corresponds, and then my rigid accessories, which they don't need cages. They just get attached using the attachment points. They don't use the rig or skinning data. So let me show you this. And so these are my pants. All right, so my pants here. And so it is created to the inner cage here. And I'm using the outer cage of my character as a base. So this way it will fit like pretty perfectly to the character I'm creating it to. And then it will also work on anything else that's caged. It might not look the best, it might get a little distorted, but at least I know anything that's close to the proportions to this character, or anything on this character is going to fit nicely because it's made to it. And then the outer cage is just defining the outer limit. So it knows how to layer on top of this when you wear something over it. So let's say the shirt is worn over the pants. It knows that it needs to offset it a bit based off of this outer cage limit. And you're only supposed to edit just to cover your clothing. So everything else should stay the same. So if you like kind of toggle between the two, you can see the only thing I change is to cover my layered clothing pants. And I did this for everything else that's layered clothing. And then quickly go over rigid accessories. This is how I organize things, but you don't necessarily need to have it in these sort of group names. Just keeps me from losing track of everything. My rigid accessories, and I hid the overall folder. Let me hide my cages. So these are all of my rigid accessories. And you can see here, there's no corresponding cages. There is no weighting or rig that it is bound to. So yeah, this is just me organizing it, but just make sure the placement is correct, even though you actually have to redo the placement in Studio, but I like to see how everything looks together. So everything looks good. I think I'm ready to export. One thing I didn't really go over, this is completely optional, but I like to set up everything using a standard surface where you can plug in all your textures, your PBR textures. So you got your normal map, metal, roughness, albedo. This doesn't need to be named in any sort of way. It just needs to be plugged into the corresponding slot. So everything looks good here. So that way I don't have to set this up in Studio. All right, so let me gather everything I'm going to export. I like to unhide everything. You don't necessarily have to do that. The other thing too, I have all my attachment points set up. They need to just be halfway emerged into the mesh of your body. That way it knows how to attach all of the legacy rigid accessories that are on Marketplace. And this also will correspond to any of your rigid accessories you are attaching to your character. So hide everything. And I'm going to select everything and then export selected. And I already have this exported out, so this is just me kind of going through the process. So this is sort of the settings I typically will use. Smoothing groups, smooth mesh, tangent by normals, reference asset content is fine. You want to have deform models checked on, skin, blend shapes, animation. We're using, I guess you don't really need blend shapes. We're not using that, but whatever else. keep it on. Then FBX 2020 is fine, binary. You don't have to embed media, but if you want everything to be embedded with your model, that's also kind of nice to have. Makes your file bigger. All right, exported. And now I'll be going over into Studio to show you the rest of the process. All right, so now that we exported out of Maya, I opened up Studio, and we're gonna now import in our character. I've already done so you can see all the examples just here in the viewport, but I'll go through the process and have all my accessories set up. But it's kind of how I organize things just in general. So go to Avatar, import 3D, then navigate to your file, your FBX file. And I know Studio 2 now supports GLTF, which it's more of a Blender format. And then we should get this file dialog and see your preview of your character with all its clothing on. You got your accessories here, my joints, sort of everything that was named and organized in Maya. We got some warnings here, just gonna kind of look at them. So I look at some of them just to kind of make sure. I seem to get these warnings a lot where it tells me cage vertices intersect with clothing, or there's unnecessary cage edits. In my case, I kind of know this is not correct, but always kind of good to go over to see why. I don't know why I'm saying modified UV map. That's a new one. Definitely didn't modify the UV map. I know it's not watertight because these cage parts aren't watertight, but I guess it's necessary for it to tell me that error. But I know my eyelashes and eyebrows are not watertight, which is fine. Gotta go in here. So we got some warnings on some of the face shapes, just telling me that it's kind of near identical to the neutral pose, which it's not. I guess it's just having a hard time telling the difference in the validation. So we'll go ahead and ignore that. My face control, so yeah, same sort of warning about that. But for the most part, I think everything is good. So I'm going to go to the top where I can see everything. And from here, I have my clothing with it. But I'm going to define it as an R15 rig because it's using this schema with the 15 parts, the 15 joint rig with the face controls and the fax data. So R15, my rig scale. So this is where it gets a little confusing. This is kind of just establishing the baseline as to how rigid legacy accessories on Marketplace, and then any of my rigid accessories too, knows how to scale to other body part scales. So if I define this as a character that's gotten a little more normal proportions, so arthro narrow, which means the proportion size kind of like falls in this range, and the shoulders are a little more narrow, whereas like the hips are a little bit more large. Whereas arthro would correspond more so for more like masculine or like normal proportions. And then default is our classic proportions. So anything blocky, shorter, stocky would kind of fall into these that scale type. So I'm going to choose arthro narrow because that's the closest scale type. And you can see it doesn't really change anything. It just kind of like gives it a value. So it knows from how to scale these accessories on Marketplace to it. All right, and it's successfully imported. Very cool. And yeah, you can see now like my skin tone isn't dark anymore, whereas like a transparent PNG, it's sort of blending it between like a black background. And this is utilizing our brick color sort of, so it's flooding the transparent PNG with that. So one of the things I'll do is first I'll actually take out all of my accessories, put it in my workspace, and then I'll select all of my body parts and I'll change it to a color I prefer as my base. All right, that looks good. But yeah, also good to like go in here and check to make sure like all the colors look pretty good. Okay, so yeah, this is like ready to go for in terms of just the body, but we actually want to attach all these accessories. And one of the things I did do, I usually do, is actually I'll add the attachment points to the layered clothing. So if I establish these attachment points from the body, then I don't actually have to establish it using some of these tools. So I can go here and just kind of like convert it to an accessory. These were already converted, but essentially, if I give it an established attachment point, which I can show you what it looks like. Body front attachment for a shirt. I can just go ahead, select all my layered clothing, accessories. That's not layered clothing, shoe left, right. Yep. And then click on create accessory, and it will tell me here, it's like, I don't have following was skipped because the incorrect object type. Okay, maybe I can't bulk do it, but usually it will tell me basically I don't have the accessory. You know what? Actually, I'm gonna put it in a group. Here you go. Yeah, there you go. It wasn't the right model group. It was just a mesh part. So yeah, now it will tell me there's no suitable attachment point that could be found in a nature Archer Girl shirt. So in order to actually attach these, I would go to shirt, go to accessory fitting tool, click on my shirt, and then go through the process of defining what it is as an accessory type. It's a shirt. This should not apply to layered clothing. This only really applies to rigid accessories. But regardless, I'll have it match my my import. What is it? Arthur Narrow selection. So realistic, slender. I think we're in the process of changing some of these names, so it might be a little confusing how it corresponds. All right, and now in here you can see it just chooses like a default sort of blocky, which I actually want to see it on my character. So I am going to select my character here and add it to the palette. And then I can switch over and see how my shirt looks on my character. And I'm happy with that. And then I generate mesh part accessory. So here it is. It's converted it into an accessory type. I got the all the correct properties added to it. Like I said, this is actually not needed. You could delete it if you want to, but it doesn't really matter. So that way I can drag or copy. I like to copy and paste a lot. Makes it a little more easy. And then paste it into my character and see how it fits. Looks good. So I would go ahead and do that for every layer clothing accessory. So yeah, once that's done, I would go ahead and go on to the rigid accessories. So let me click on a rigid accessory and kind of show you the process. Would love the option just to be able to add an attachment point from DCC and be able to like use the create accessory button, but it doesn't, it needs like a lot more information than layered clothing does. So you kind of have to take it through this process. It doesn't just rely on the attachment point. So one of the annoying things is that it does reposition your accessory and it doesn't retain the sort of position from your character. But so this is an accessory. I want to define it as a hat. Looks like it actually did bring it up a bit. I'm wondering if they fixed it now that it will actually correspond to my position that I have it at. This is where it's important. You actually want to define your body type here. And that's slender. And I'm going to select my character. And my preview window. I'm going to move it back to where I want it. Not quite. It looks like it's sort of off from how I had it placed here. Right. Yeah, it's off-centered. So essentially, we're getting better tools to replace this, so it'd be more just like a conversion once you bring in the studio, so you don't have to do this process. But for right now, we require this. So move it over. And it doesn't matter how it looks on this sort of mannequin here. You want to look at it here to make sure it's fitting your character how you want. So I'm going to say I'm happy with that. And then I'll generate the mesh accessory, which converts it to a accessory here. Got my hat. I'm going to copy that and paste it onto my character. See how it attaches. All right, that looks good. So I would do that for the rest of my rigid accessories. And then once I'm done, I'd copy all of my accessories that I created and paste it onto, or drag and drop onto my character here. I also like to go in here and give it a layering order. If you go on the wrap deformer itself, you can actually order it, and so it will actually layer correctly. So in this case, I wanted the boots to go over the pants, so I gave it a higher layering order than my pants, so order 5. All right, so everything looks good. I'm happy with how everything attached. So now I'm going to copy, paste, and I'm going to rename this as starter character. We have tools too now that make it easier. The avatar setup tool. You can also test your character. They make it easy where you can just test in place. But this is kind of how I do it. So renamed it starter character. I hit F5. And now I just want to test my character and run around and make sure it looks okay. Yeah, it looks good. I'm not going to be able to see the facts data. So, yeah, I have to actually publish the place and then I can test it there. So what I'll do is I'll publish to Roblox and then I'll I'll play it through the browser. All right, so now that we've published to Roblox, I want to test in client just so we can see how the face shapes look. So I'm going to hit play, and that will open up the player. All right, now that my player is open, I'm going to run around and check out how my character looks. You can see like it's just using sort of default blinking emotes to drive the face rig and the face shapes that we created. So what I want to do is go here and I want to turn on my camera, zoom, and that way you can see and test your character's face shapes and expressions, make sure they look good. So I just kind of do exaggerated expressions and make sure it looks good. There's not any sort of any weirdness happening or intersections. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with the results. Weighting looks good. Everything looks attached correctly. But yeah, that basically covers it from start to finish, from DCC to Studio, the whole process. And yeah, I hope this will help you. And when you go to create your own avatar for Roblox and your own accessories and layered clothing. All right, it's been great. All right.